Almost got it. This one's stubborn. Need a hand with that? No, I got it. Thanks. All right, be careful.
As they surrounded the small, weathered house with the peeling blue paint. Inside, Mark Wilson clutched his 7-year-old daughter Emma to his chest, wondering if this was the end of everything. Yesterday, he had given away his last $18 to a stranger in a moment of compassion he couldn't afford. Now, as car doors began to open in unison, he was about to discover that sometimes, the universe has a way of returning kindness in ways we could never imagine. If this story touches your heart, please consider hitting that like button and subscribing to our channel for more incredible true stories that restore faith in humanity. Your support helps us continue sharing these moments that remind us all of the good still left in our world. Mark hadn't always struggled. 3 years ago, he had a stable job at the local manufacturing plant, a modest but comfortable home, and a loving wife named Sarah. They weren't rich by any means, but they made ends meet and had built a happy life with their daughter Emma. Then came the accident. A rainy night, a truck driver who fell asleep at the wheel, and in an instant, Sarah was gone forever. The grief was overwhelming, but Mark had to stay strong for Emma. The funeral expenses depleted their modest savings, and then came the medical bills from Mark's injuries in the same accident. He had spent 2 months in recovery, unable to work, and though his job had held his position, the mounting debt became impossible to manage. By the time he returned to work, he was already falling behind on mortgage payments. Then, as if fate hadn't been cruel enough, the manufacturing plant announced mass layoffs due to outsourcing. Mark, along with hundreds of others, found himself unemployed in a small town with limited opportunities. He took whatever odd jobs he could find, delivering pizzas at night, stocking shelves in the early mornings, mowing lawns on weekends, anything to keep a roof over Emma's head and food on the table. "Daddy, are we going to be okay?" Emma would ask, her innocent eyes looking up at him with complete trust that somehow, he would make everything all right. Those moments broke his heart more than anything else, but he always managed a smile for her. "Of course, sweetheart. We're a team, remember? And teams always find a way." By the fall of that year, Mark had managed to find a steadier job at a local garage, but it paid significantly less than his previous position. The mortgage company had been sending increasingly threatening letters, and he knew foreclosure was imminent. He had exactly $18 to last until his next paycheck, 3 days away, and an empty refrigerator save for some milk, half a loaf of bread, and a jar of peanut butter. That Wednesday afternoon, after dropping Emma off at school, Mark's ancient Civic began making a terrible grinding noise and finally sputtered to a stop on the side of the road, about 2 miles from the garage where he worked. He couldn't afford a tow truck, and being late would mean risking the job he so desperately needed. With no other option, he began walking as fast as he could, hoping to make it on time. The November wind cut through his thin jacket, and dark clouds threatened rain. As he hurried along the shoulder of the highway, he noticed a car pulled over about a quarter mile ahead with its hazard lights blinking. As Mark got closer, he saw a man in an expensive-looking coat standing beside a sleek black Mercedes, looking helplessly at a flat tire. Mark's first instinct was to keep walking. He couldn't afford to be late, and he had his own problems to worry about. But something made him stop. "Need some help?" Mark called out, already knowing he would regret the offer. The man turned, relief washing over his face. "Yes, please. I have a meeting in 30 minutes, and I've never changed a tire before. I called for roadside assistance, but they said it would be at least an hour." Mark glanced at his watch. If he worked quickly, he might still make it to his shift on time. "I can help you. I'm a mechanic." The man looked surprised, taking in Mark's worn clothes and tired face. "That's incredibly kind of you. I'm Richard, by the way." "Mark," he replied simply, already kneeling to examine the flat tire. Working efficiently, Mark had the spare tire installed in under 15 minutes. His hands were dirty and cold, but the job was done. "You're a lifesaver," Richard said, reaching for his wallet. "Please, let me pay you for your time. Mark shook his head. No need. Just helping out. I insist, Richard pressed, holding out a $50 bill. For a moment, Mark was tempted. That money could buy groceries for the week. But something about the man's expensive car and designer coat made him refuse. Really, it's fine. Just pay it forward someday. As Mark turned to leave, he realized he would definitely be late for work now, and the sky had opened up, rain beginning to pour down. His heart sank as he imagined the conversation with his boss, who had already warned him about tardiness. At least let me give you a ride, Richard called after him. It's pouring, and it's the least I can do. Mark hesitated before accepting, grateful at least to be out of the rain. As they drove, Richard asked where he was headed. Pine Street Garage, Mark answered. I'm already late for my shift. You stopped to help me even though you were going to be late for work? Richard seemed genuinely surprised. Mark shrugged. Couldn't just leave you stranded. When they arrived at the garage, Mark's boss was standing outside, arms crossed, looking anything but pleased. Mark thanked Richard for the ride and stepped out into the rain, preparing himself for what would likely be his termination. To his shock, Richard got out of the car as well and approached the garage owner. After a brief conversation that Mark couldn't hear over the rain, his boss's demeanor completely changed. He nodded several times, shook Richard's hand, and then turned to Mark with a completely different expression. Take the day off, Wilson. Paid. And come in an hour later tomorrow, he said before heading back inside. Mark stood dumbfounded as Richard returned to him. What did you say to him? Richard smiled. Just explained the situation and that your tardiness was entirely my fault. I also mentioned that I'm in need of a good mechanic for my company's fleet and might be interested in bringing our business here. He handed Mark a business card. Richard Calloway, CEO of Calloway Enterprises. Mark recognized the name of one of the largest employers in the region. Thank you, he managed to say. No, thank you, Richard replied. Integrity like yours is rare. Take care, Mark. As Richard drove away, Mark stood in the rain, grateful for the unexpected day off but also acutely aware that he now had hours to kill before picking up Emma from school, and nowhere to go in the downpour. He walked to a nearby diner, planning to nurse a cup of coffee for as long as possible to stay warm and dry. The small bell above the door jingled as he entered, and he slid into a booth near the back. When the waitress came, he ordered the cheapest item on the menu, a cup of black coffee. That'll be $2.50, she said, her name tag reading, Diane. Mark reached into his pocket and felt the $18 that had to last until payday. He pulled out 3 ones and told her to keep the change, knowing he was being financially irresponsible but feeling too dejected to care. As he sat warming his hands around the mug, the bell jingled again. A young woman entered, soaking wet and clearly distressed. She approached the counter, speaking in hushed, urgent tones to Diane. Mark tried not to eavesdrop, but in the quiet diner, it was impossible not to overhear. I'm sorry, my wallet was stolen at the bus station, the woman explained, her voice trembling. I just need to use a phone to call my brother to come get me. Phones are for paying customers only, Diane replied, not unkindly but firmly. House policy. Please, the woman pleaded. I haven't eaten since yesterday, and I'm stranded here. I just need to make one call. Mark watched as Diane's face softened slightly. Tell you what, you can order something small, and I'll let you use the phone in the back. But I don't have any money, the woman repeated, tears welling in her eyes. My brother lives 2 hours away, and I have no way to contact him. Before he could think better of it, Mark stood up and walked to the counter. Excuse me, he said. I couldn't help overhearing. I can cover a meal for you. Both women turned to look at him with surprise. The young woman shook her head. That's very kind, but I couldn't accept. Please, Mark insisted. I know what it's like to be in a tough spot. After a moment's hesitation, the woman nodded gratefully. Thank you so much. I'm Lisa. Mark, he replied with a tired smile. He returned to his booth, and Lisa joined him after ordering a modest meal and using the diner's phone. As they talked, Mark learned that Lisa had come to town for a job interview that had fallen through. On her way back to the bus station, her wallet had been snatched, leaving her completely stranded until her brother could arrive. What about you? She asked. You look like you've had a rough day yourself. Mark found himself telling her about his broken-down car, his late arrival at work, and the strange encounter with Richard. He didn't mention his financial struggles or Emma, keeping those private concerns to himself. When the bill came, it was $15.42 with Lisa's meal and his coffee. Mark handed over his remaining cash, all $18, and told Diane to keep the change again. He now had exactly $0 to his name until payday, but somehow, he didn't regret it. As they prepared to leave, Lisa's brother called the diner to say he was running late due to the storm and wouldn't arrive for several more hours. Mark, with nowhere else to be until Emma's school let out, offered to keep Lisa company. They talked for hours, with Diane refilling Mark's coffee for free after learning of his generosity. Lisa was easy to talk to, and for the first time in months, Mark felt the weight on his shoulders lighten just a little. When it was finally time to pick up Emma, he wished Lisa well and headed out into the now clearing sky. That evening, as he made peanut butter sandwiches for dinner, Mark pushed aside his worry about how they would manage until payday. Emma chatted happily about her day at school, blissfully unaware of their precarious financial situation. After tucking Emma into bed, Mark sat at his small kitchen table, bills spread out before him, trying to figure out which ones he could postpone paying yet again. The mortgage was 3 months behind, and the final notice from the power company threatened disconnection if payment wasn't received by the end of the week. He put his head in his hands, the brief respite of the afternoon fading into the harsh reality of his circumstances. Morning came too quickly. Mark woke Emma, helped her dress and have breakfast, then walked her to school since his car remained broken down by the highway. The sky was clear, and Emma skipped alongside him, finding joy in the simplest things as children often do. Look, Daddy! A rainbow, she exclaimed, pointing to a faint arc in the eastern sky. Make a wish, Mark told her, smiling despite his exhaustion. I wish. Emma began loudly, then stopped herself. Wait, I can't say it out loud or it won't come true. Mark chuckled. That's right, sweetheart. Keep it secret. After dropping Emma off, he began the long walk to the garage, grateful that his boss had allowed him to come in an hour later. He was about halfway there when a familiar black Mercedes pulled alongside him. Richard Calloway rolled down his window. Mark. I was hoping I'd run into you again. Need a ride? Surprised, Mark accepted the offer. As they drove, Richard explained that he had been thinking about their encounter the previous day. You know, not many people would stop to help a stranger when they're already struggling themselves, Richard commented. Mark shrugged uncomfortably. It was the right thing to do. Yes, but the right thing isn't always the easy thing, Richard replied. My father used to say that a person's character is revealed not by how they act when things are going well, but by how they behave when everything is falling apart. They arrived at the garage, and Mark thanked Richard for the ride, expecting that to be the end of their brief connection. But Richard handed him another business card. I meant what I said about needing a good mechanic for my company's fleet, Richard said. Come by my office next week for an interview. The starting salary is twice what you're making here. Mark stared at the card in disbelief. Why would you do this for me? Richard smiled. Call it paying it forward. Throughout his shift, Mark found himself distracted by the possibility of a better job. The salary Richard had mentioned would be enough to catch up on the mortgage and give Emma the stability she deserved. But he didn't want to get his hopes up. Life had taught him that things rarely worked out as planned. By the time he finished work, gathered Emma from her after-school program, and walked home, Mark was exhausted. As they rounded the corner onto their street, he stopped short, his heart racing. 5 black SUVs were parked outside their house. "Daddy, whose cars are those?" Emma asked, clutching his hand tighter. "I don't know, sweetheart," Mark answered honestly, a knot of fear forming in his stomach. Were they being evicted? Had the mortgage company sent people to remove them from the house? As they approached cautiously, the door of the lead SUV opened, and Richard Calloway stepped out. Behind him, several people emerged from the other vehicles, including, to Mark's astonishment, Lisa from the diner. "What's going on?" Mark asked, positioning himself protectively in front of Emma. Richard approached with a warm smile. "Mark, I owe you an explanation. Lisa isn't actually a stranded traveler. She works for me." Mark's confusion deepened as Lisa stepped forward. "I'm Richard's executive assistant," she explained. "Yesterday was a test, though the story about my wallet being stolen was made up." "A test?" Mark repeated, still not understanding. Richard nodded. "For the past year, I've been conducting a social experiment. I approach people who seem to be struggling, pretend to need help, and see how they respond. Then, my team creates another scenario to test their generosity when they themselves have very little to give." "But why?" Mark asked. "Because I'm looking for someone special to help run a new charitable foundation I'm establishing," Richard explained. "Someone who understands hardship but hasn't let it harden their heart. Someone who still chooses kindness even when it costs them everything." Lisa stepped forward. "We've tested hundreds of people, Mark. You're the only one who helped Richard with his car despite being late for work and refused payment. Then, you gave a stranger your last $18 without hesitation. How did you know it was my last $18? Mark asked, stunned. Richard smiled. "We do thorough background research on everyone we test. I know about your wife Sarah, about your accident, the medical bills, losing your job at the plant. I know you've been working 3 jobs at times to keep a roof over Emma's head." Mark felt exposed, vulnerable, but also strangely relieved to be seen, truly seen, after struggling alone for so long. "These people," Richard continued, gesturing to the others who had emerged from the SUVs, "are part of my team. They've brought a few things for you and Emma." As if on cue, the group began unloading the vehicles. Groceries, new clothes for both Mark and Emma, toys, books, and a laptop. One man approached with keys in his hand. "Your car has been repaired and upgraded," he explained, placing the keys in Mark's palm. "New transmission, brakes, tires, everything. It's parked around the corner." Mark was speechless, tears filling his eyes as Emma bounced excitedly beside him. "There's more," Richard said gently. "I'd like to offer you the position of Director of Community Outreach for the Calloway Foundation. The salary is $85,000 a year with full benefits. Your first assignment would be to identify families in situations similar to yours and develop programs to help them get back on their feet." I don't know what to say," Mark stammered. "Say yes, Daddy," Emma urged, understanding enough to know this was something good. Mark looked down at his daughter's hopeful face, then back at Richard and the team of people who had appeared like angels at his doorstep. "Yes," he said finally, his voice breaking. "Yes, thank you." Richard smiled broadly and handed him an envelope. "This is an advance on your first paycheck and the deed to your house. The mortgage has been paid in full." Mark opened the envelope with shaking hands, unable to believe what was happening. Inside was a cashier's check for $10,000 and documents showing the house was now completely his.